Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, your packed snapshot of the week's biggest business stories, their context, their relevance and policy impact. I'm Govindraj, Ethiraj. The government, through the Empowered Committee of State Finance Ministers, has approved a Model Goods and Services Tax or GST law. The government has released the draft GST law in public domain for discussion and is hopeful of passing a constitutional amendment in the monsoon session of Parliament starting July 1st week. Now, while the process of introducing GST has gone on for several years, the new draft has come out with several new clauses, such as a uniform GST for all online purchases and e-commerce. Now, the question is, where does all this or this draft take us in terms of final implementation? And most importantly, how will life change for us as this new tax regime gets implemented? To discuss this, I'm joined by Ritesh Kanodia, partner at Dhruva Advisors, and MS Mani, Senior Director, Indirect Tax at Deloitte, India. Thank you both for joining us. Mani, let me start with you. So, just to put things in context for someone who's trying to understand, what does this model GST law mean in terms of progress from all that we've seen and heard in the last few years?
Okay, I think it means that significant progress has been made by the government. But what we need to keep in mind is that the Constitution Amendment Bill and the model GST law are now going to work in parallel. So while the bill is before the Rajya Sabha and while the bill is to be debated in the monsoon session, the fact that the Constitution Amendment Bill has been put before the Empowered Committee of State Finance Ministers and the fact that the government has put it in public domain, to me means that the government is at a very advanced stage of preparation in terms of the GST rollout.
Right. Okay. So that's the sense from at least from an administrative point of view. Let's get down to some of the key aspects of this model law, and let me get Ritesh in first. Ritesh, walk us through what you've taken away from the reading or your first reading of this model GST law.
So the model GST law, as you look at it, is legislative framework which is interplay of various previous legislations. So we had the excise law earlier, we had the separate service tax law, we had the VAT law. So it is basically an amalgam of all the three laws. And what they have tried to do is, we had different charging provisions, we have different valuation provisions. There were different bases of assessment, different bases of recovery of tax, etc. So what this does is now brings all of them to under a single legislative code. While this is very advantageous because there is one legislation and people will have to deal with one legislation, but it would throw up its own challenges in terms of how a tax is going to be levied on transactions. So for example, until like today, services were not subjected to certain valuation provisions like inclusion of royalty or related party transaction. Obviously, it would have its own challenges and issues. Barter transactions were till date not liable to VAT. Now they would become liable to VAT. So we will have to see, how these concepts evolve on a going forward basis. Clearly, it's a good step forward that the model law has been introduced. We need to see now how does it get finalized into a final law. What are the wordings of the final law? How does it get implemented in both on a legislative front and a judicial front? So I think a lot needs to be covered once the constitutional bill goes through the Rajya Sabha.
So, Mani, as you said also, what this suggests is that a lot of work has gone in. People have actually sat down, tried to merge all these laws and try to present a composite picture to potential users of this law, including people from the tax profession. So, tell us, what are the 2 or 3 things that now stand out in this law, and then we'll come to what really needs to be done to make sure that it's a sort of smooth and easy rollout.
I would say one very significant feature of the model GST law is that the government appears to have taken a lot of care in having the provisions of the SGST law, CGST law and IGST law drafted and put in public domain.
Okay.
Now,
so can you expand that when you say SG, CG?
Now GST in India is going to operate under a state goods and services tax, which is SGST, a central goods and services tax, which is CGST, and SGST and CGST will typically be applying on transactions within a state, and for interstate transaction there will be a tax called as IGST, which is the summation of SGST and CGST.
Got it.
Now these 3 laws, if you look at the model GST bill, they have segregated certain portions. So for instance, in terms of the definitions, what constitutes goods, what constitutes services, who is a dealer, now that's common, that has not been segregated. But when you move on ahead and when you try to segregate how services will be supplied, what is the time of supply of services, how can services be supplied within a state, how can goods be supplied interstate, in all of these things the model law itself contains suggested provisions for the SGST, for the CGST and for the IGST. So, they have put it within brackets, which to me means that once this law is ratified by the states and once the comments are received from the stakeholders and they incorporate those, it will be very easy for the government to come out with a model CGST law, a model SGST law and a model IGST law.
Got it. So, what will change, I mean, just to ask a more sort of consumer question, what can change once, if it goes through with all the required provisions and changes on, really in my life, if I were to be a consumer of goods or services or both?
Okay, if you are a consumer of goods, what would broadly happen is that the total tax that you pay on many items of daily use, FMCG products and durables especially, the total indirect tax impact on that would reduce. Because today for most of them we end up paying an excise plus a VAT, which adds up to around 25% or so. Now that is expected to come to somewhere around 18%, if the 18% rate is accepted. So for a consumer of goods,
there is silence on the rate in this, right?
That's right. Now for a now rate is to be decided by the GST Council,
correct,
which is to be formed after the Constitution Amendment Bill is passed. Now for a consumer of goods, therefore, what should happen if the reduction in taxes is passed on by the manufacturers, prices of goods may go down a bit. For consumers of services, it may go up a bit because after the recent cess which has been introduced, the service tax rate is 15%. If that goes up to 18%, there is expected to be an increase in prices of services.
Okay.
Now, in addition to that, what the GST is doing is to reduce the GST threshold even for manufacturers from the present threshold to a threshold which is as low as 10 lakhs.
Right.
Now, that is again expected to bring a large number of newer manufacturers under the GST net.
Right. Okay, Ritesh, the other question inevitably that's asked is the administrative capability, or not the administrative challenges of rolling out something like this, which is so complex as we've known for all these years. What's your sense? I mean, does this law give you a insight into that, and what are the challenges or problems that you're anticipating?
So the law definitely lays down, what an SSE needs to do post GST is introduced. So whether in terms of registration, whether in terms of compliance, whether in terms of reporting. But if you see the number of reportings which are required to be done now, because each supplier will have to register in each and every state where he is present. So whether it be a supplier of goods or whether it be a supplier of services. What we can actually see is, in terms of the number of returns, for example. So for every state, they will have to file 3 returns. One is inward, one is outward, and one is an annual return. And the number of returns which are likely to be filed are going to be more than 1,000, which is quite huge. And again, this is going to be per SSE. So if I am registered, there is a concept of being registered as a separate vertical. So if I register as a separate vertical, I will have to, adhere to those separate compliance requirements. There is one principle of, matching of tax credits. So if my tax credit don't match with what the supplier charges me, there is going to be a reversal, and there are going to be issues on that front which might become a cost.
Is this all adding up to more paperwork than before? I mean, just to give a sense.
See, only thing is, it would really depend upon how robust is the GSTN, because if everything is a digital filing, if everything has to be uploaded, probably I would say not more paperwork. Yes, definitely more compliance, because the compliances are going to be state-wise. The accounting and record that have to be maintained would be state-wise. Yes, the compliance increases manifold times. It would increase a lot of burden upon the SSEs. However, if I have to look at the benefits which the law brings in terms of the fungibility of credits, across goods and services, I think this is something which people can really live with.
So, just to look forward, if you were to assume that things start moving by July, what's your sense, Mani? What is the sequence looking like? What's the timeline looking like?
See, the Constitution Amendment Bill, once it is approved by the Rajya Sabha, will need to be ratified by at least 50% of the states.
But it appears that most states except for one maybe are on board.
Yeah. But when we say 50% of states, that typically means around 15 states. But it will need to go to the state assemblies and be ratified by them. For which again the state assembly needs to be in session. So that is one process which will need to be undergone. And it is only after the constitution, now after the states ratify it, it comes back to the president for presidential assent. It's only when it gets a presidential assent that the Constitution Amendment Bill ends up amending the constitution, and the GST bill can be placed before parliament only after the constitution is amended.
Okay. So, it's
So
sounding
we
like
have
it's
made a
gonna
lot
take
of
some
progress,
time.
but we are a little bit away.
Okay, so one point that I wanted to quickly address, online commerce. I mean, a lot of people buy online. So, is this mean that they're going to pay more for stuff that they buy online?
I would say it's not a question of paying more. I would say the welcome feature is that in all the states, e-commerce will be treated at par. So we have a huge divergence in terms of the manner in which various states treat e-commerce.
Or
So
they
some
don't
of
treat
the-
at all.
Or
yeah.
they don't treat at all.
Yeah.
And the e-commerce companies typically have stopped deliveries in some of the states. So some states they don't cater to at all. So what this will bring
Because
in,
there's a incidence.
because there's an
tax
incidence of entry tax
Yeah.
in some of the states. In some of the other states, there is a necessity for the buyer of goods to produce a form. And if you are a retail consumer, you can't produce a form. Now, to be fair to the states, the reason why they seem to be doing this is in some cases, while e-commerce is expected to cater to B2C, in some cases it ends up as being B2B as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So the idea is to prevent that.
Yeah.
But what the model GST law says is that all states will be treating e-commerce at par, and it is the e-commerce aggregator or the e-commerce company which will typically do a withholding tax of the GST from the supplier's bill.
Right.
So to that extent, it becomes uniform all across.
Right.
This might adversely affect the smaller sellers on the e-commerce platform.
No, and there has to be some increase to the consumer, isn't it?
That's right.
There has to be.
It will
Because
get passed
it was
on.
not there
That's
all
right.
this while.
So it will get passed on.
Right. Okay. Ritesh, last word. What's the one thing that you would look out for as this process starts moving?
So I think clearly the constitution amendment needs to go through. There is a change in the numbers in Rajya Sabha. Hopefully, we are able to get a consensus on the bill and, it moves forward, because all the other processes, start after that. When I say all the processes, I would not only mean the government front, but also from the industry front, because a lot of people are actually waiting and watching to see, how it evolves in the Rajya Sabha. A lot of consensus needs to go through, industry needs to do a lot of preparation. So it's very, very important that, it goes through the constitution, the constitution bill goes through, post which, everything then just moves ahead. That's to my mind very critical.
Ritesh, we've run out of time on this. Thank you so much, Manif, and both of you for joining. We need to go in for a break. Coming up on the other side, inflation levels are rising. We find out how that could affect you. Stay with us. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Inflation numbers are rising again. Retail inflation has touched a near 2-year high of 5.76% in May, thanks to rising prices of pulses, sugar and vegetables. Now, potato prices, for example, were up 60% and pulses were up 35%. Wholesale price inflation, a wider index, also rose 0.79% in May, higher than the previous month of 0.34%. On the other hand, prices of vegetables like tomatoes are soaring because of the carry-on effect of drought conditions. The rains are expected to solve many problems, but are already showing a 20% deficiency in contrast to predictions of above average monsoons. Now, the question we are asking is, what does all this mean for the Aam Aadmi, and should the government be looking at corrective and preparatory action, whether through policy or interest rates? To discuss this, I'm joined here by Dr. Shubhadar Rao, Chief Economist at Yes Bank, and A. Prasanna, Economist at ICICI Securities. Thank you both for joining me. Shubhadar, let me begin with you. Why is this a surprise, or why there seems to be a lot of element of surprise, even going by what the Reserve Bank said recently, as in a week ago?
Actually, yes. I mean, we were anticipating price pressures to build up over the summer months, which typically happens every year. But this time, the extent to which the prices rose was perhaps a little bit surprising. In a sense, the momentum accelerated between both April and May. April, of course, we knew was a very intense month of heat, and kind of a prediction that monsoon may come in a bit late also gave rise to some kind of speculative elements getting into the pricing of food articles, particularly. We all know that pulses production has improved, but supply to demand conditions perhaps are not yet in equilibrium, and that is where we see pulse prices getting raised every year over the last few years. In fact, government is now looking to outsource the growing of pulses right into Mozambique, is what I hear. And perishables like vegetables also, typically summer months, you see a very sharp uptick. So as you rightly said, there are various items within food which have, added to the inflationary pressure. While I must add that we were anticipating April to be at 5.39, which came spot on, which has been revised upward subsequently. What really has been worrying is you have the food component rising, which is not a huge surprise, but an extent of it is surprise. You also have commodity prices now rising, led by oil. So while we know that there could be some upside limit to where the oil prices settle at, but the fact that from $35–40 they've gone up to 50. So all put together, combine it with sticky core inflation, which is essentially from services, does not give comfort to the Reserve Bank in terms of waiting rather, how long can the upward momentum last and how much of disinflation can result once the monsoon set in. So I think it's going to be wait and watch. RBI has reiterated its accommodative stance, but we believe that this kind of momentum in inflation could always prompt RBI to be more concerned about how far to go.
Right. Okay. Prasanna, what are you taking away from these numbers? To what extent are you surprised? And more importantly, what's your outlook if you were to look at the next 3 months?
So, I think there are two components to this, right, in terms of the rise in food prices. One is anyway, you have the usual seasonal pattern. So, vegetable prices do go up. Of course, there can be some variations. But the thing about vegetable prices is usually they tend to go up and then they tend to come down by a certain proportion. So, I think in some sense it's fairly predictable. Of course, you cannot exactly pinpoint the turning point, but during the year at some point they will come down. But the other part of it is the rise in proteins, in particular pulses within that, and that is more of a structural kind of an issue, right? So the demand for protein food is going up as incomes are rising, but at the same time the supply response is not kept up, and that is something which is a problem which successive governments have grappled with, and I think it's fair to say I think none of the governments have found any lasting solution. So I actually don't know whether right now also whether we are any closer to finding a solution to that. So I think these are the two components, and of course if this year the rains are good, some of the pulses inflation can cool off, but again that will be after the harvest season, after the Kharif harvest, and of course the monsoon hasn't started off well, but hopefully by July and August it will pick up, and therefore by September, October we have some impact on pulses prices. But all said and done, we do think that in the next few months inflation will be around the 5.5% handle. We don't think it will cross 6% purely because of food prices. But of course what we have to remember is the pay commission implementation is also looming. So once that comes in, there will be an impact on the housing inflation because of the HRA adjustment, and that can push actually headline inflation to above 6% also sometime later this year. Our view has been ever since the April policy has been is that RBI is done with rate cuts. We think the repo rate has bottomed out at 6.5%. We don't think the RBI will be able to hit its inflation target of 5% for the Jan-March quarter, and achieving 4% in the year ahead is going to be even more difficult, because of which we feel that the central bank will not be able to cut rates any further from here on.
Okay, Shubhada, what can this mean for consumers? I mean, so if we are looking at vegetable prices specifically, it's about 11% almost, which compared to just 4% or 4.8% in April. So that's a substantial jump, and that can really cause pain to consumers or citizens here.
Absolutely. I think that is where rains become ever so important, because typically you associate the shooting up and equal extent of decline associated with monsoons and the rain arrival, whereas vegetable prices are concerned. As far as the proteins, etc., is the government's actions will be very important. How much does it import? Timely imports will be very critical, which the government has put in place. The imports of pulses.
But is there a problem on the distribution side? That's what economist Ashok Gulati seems to think.
Yeah, distribution definitely, because
importing and stocking, but not distributing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So while 2 years the government has exhibited fabulous response mechanism to deal with food inflation, because 2 years of successive drought-like conditions, in earlier times food inflation could have led up to 15–20%. Last year it did not go up beyond 7%. But I guess there's diminishing marginal utility in policy response also. Government has been taking steps. Recently, the government did announce an increase of 20% of export duty on sugar and so on. So I think these have come, but they will, by the time they play out in terms of the prices of these commodities actually at retail level in the market, it would take time.
Right.
We have already seen raised prices. Government will have to be absolutely on the ball and take timely response actions as far as these prices are concerned.
Right. So, Prasanna, what's your sense on the broader impact, right? So, one is the food and related issues, including vegetable prices that we spoke of, and the consumer impact. Are you seeing any broader impact of rising inflation levels, particularly core?
So if you look at core inflation, actually, this time core inflation actually came down. But again, if you strip out petrol and diesel, what we term as core inflation, that has been a very tight range of between 5 and 5.5% on a year-on-year basis. I think for the last more than a year, it's been in that range, and we don't see it moving much from there. In fact, we don't see it coming down too much also. That is one of the reasons why we think the headline inflation also, once all this food price pressures abate, even after that, since the underlying inflation is still going to be around 5%, we don't expect headline to dip below 5% anytime soon. And that is the reason why we think that it's going to be extremely difficult for RBI to hit its inflation targets from now onwards.
Is that a high number or a low number in your estimation?
Well, I think if RBI is serious about its target of 4%, then core inflation has to come down. I think the question has to be put to RBI, how serious are they about the targets, right? So if they are not going to hit the targets, then perhaps they should stop saying they are in accommodative phase.
Right. So, Prasanna, if you were to look ahead now, how do we need to respond, and should we be looking at a plan B, particularly if rains get a little more delayed, if there is a sort of rising deficiency in rainfall numbers?
So, if actually monsoon turns out to be poorer compared to the estimates, then it's a big problem, and I don't think there is any immediate solution. So I think at best what we can do is we can hope that the IMD's forecasts are right. Of course, last year they got it right, and this year they're saying it's going to be excess, normal to excess. So hopefully IMD has got it right again, and in any case I think the rains in July are the most important, right? So what happens in June is not so important. So as long as the monsoon covers the entire country by end of this month, and then the rains in July are good, then I think some of those seasonal factors, seasonal problems which I spoke about, at least they should be solved by September, October. But if you're asking me what happens if monsoon fails again for another year, then I'm afraid we don't have any solutions actually. Then things are going to get quite sticky for both the government and the RBI.
So, okay, so Shobhita, let me ask you. So, I mean, as a strategic policy response, what are the one or two things that we should be thinking about and actively looking at? I mean, one could be the plan B to delayed monsoon or deficient monsoon, but even in general, given how prices are rising.
I think very clearly supply responses have to get better. It's not just about the protein items, but more importantly, we have seen very, very noisy moves in terms of vegetable prices. I think the whole thing about mandis and, you know, the cartelization that we many a time see, that needs to be really looked into, and that unfortunately not the center but the state governments will have to really closely monitor the mandi prices, you know, for these vegetables. Items like even sugar for that matter. We really need a very strong sustainable sugar policy. I mean, we have erratic years of production, either it's a glut or it's a sharp scarcity. Agriculture
and it's also
policy,
consuming a lot of water, by the way.
Exactly, and absolutely, agriculture policy needs to be looked at. Supply chain, warehouse, investment in agri infrastructure. These are, you know, sustainable solutions over the long period. But unfortunately, every year we just mull over them and you know, discuss them. So yes, as Prasanna said, you know, if the rainfalls don't play out as per the prediction, then we have a serious problem on hand, because it's not just the inflation. How are you going to look at what kind of growth drivers within the economy? Because once again, the rural economy will be devoid of any demand, you know, impulses, and that's going to be a fairly serious issue at hand. But I think not just IMD, most of the global forecasting agencies on weather have also predicted normal. Even if there's a margin of error, IMD has predicted 107 or 111.
Right, yeah. So on the best case, it could be much better.
It could be 100, but hopefully it's not 80s and 85, what we saw for the last 2 years. So yes, as far as the policy is concerned, I do believe that there is some little scope for one final cut. We were actually earlier looking at a June or an August policy easing, but obviously obviously the sharpness of price momentum, prompted us to dilute that call. We do believe that one final cut could get effected between October, December, once there is an adequate evidence of disinflation setting in for these very items.
Right. Okay. Right. We've run out of time, Shubha. I did want to take you up on that, but we've run out of time completely. Thank you, Prasanna, as well. That's all we have time for on Policy Watch this week. We'll be back next week, same time. Thanks for watching.